Workforce is it's the engine that drives everything. People are the mechanism that everything happens, and so it's critical that we ensure we have an adequate supply of talent. As I sometimes tell people, by definition, well-educated, talented people are always in short supply, and advantage accrues to those regions and societies that capture a disproportionate percentage of that talent. And that's what we have to continue to focus on, which is a good segue actually to our next conversation, which is we're going to hear a presentation from NSF's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Chuck Barber. And Chuck we'd hoped he would be here at the previous meeting, but some unexpected circumstances intruded, but we're delighted that he is here today. It's worth remembering that the CDIO position was required as part of the CHIPS and Science Act. And Chuck is going to offer some perspectives on strategy as we work on the missing millions in STEM, meeting NSF's agency priority goals and meeting new EPSCoR targets, and a whole host of other things as well. And Chuck, I'd like to explicitly thank you for meeting with MRX and providing your impact on the broader impacts criterion. And I'm going to hand the floor over to Chuck, who's going to do yet another, or to Ponch, who's going to do yet another introduction of Chuck.
No, I think I'll keep it short. I mean, we're very fortunate to have Chuck's leadership as a CDIO of NSF. He's already put in place a number of things that's really changing. I mean, I would say underlying culture of the institution itself being elevated, and through that, a number of these important issues that Chuck is addressing. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that already Chuck, in a short time, has been looked upon as somebody that, OPM, OMB, and other agencies look up to, and the Hill look up to in terms of how to frame all of this the right way to get the outcomes we seek. Over to you, Chuck. Thank you so much.
Can y'all hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Clicker's not working. Oh. I want y'all to see all of that, yeah. All right. So good afternoon, and I'll try my best to be concise and be mindful of the time. But as Dan said, I was supposed to have this conversation with you in December, and unfortunately I wasn't able to, but I am very grateful to be here with you this afternoon. And I'm going to anchor just a little bit on this first slide here, because this slide here is going to kind of set the stage for the rest of the conversation. But as you all are aware, we're in the middle of some interesting times. DEI laws continue to pop up across the country. And when I checked this morning, we are at 73 bills introduced across about 26 states right now. That and the SCOTUS decision on affirmative action, and then to kind of add to the compounding complexity, language in this space changes so much that we can never have consensus on what's truly acceptable or what's appropriate. And so when you think about all of these things, given the amplified complexity and the sensitivity, how do we future-proof this work so that it is sustainable and so that this work is not just a moment in time, but a movement in time? In my humble opinion, it starts with the focus on organizational change needed to really get to those outcomes that we're seeking. We're going to have to get to a point to where we view DEIA as the outcome and not the process. And when we can have that North Star mindset, it's easy to unify others into looking at how we assess our policy instruments for any unintended consequences, how we move past just looking at diversity by the numbers and start to look at underrepresentation as a leveling strategy and also as an equity issue in our talent management systems. It's also being able to leverage that full spectrum of diverse talent that society has to offer within our organizations to be a part of those decision-making conversations, those problem-solving strategies, and other operational discussions. And then, DEIA is more than just an acronym. It's a gateway to psychological safety and the organizational change work needed to really get to those outcomes that we're seeking. And DEIA also helps to link this work to culture. Culture is the underpinning to everything that we're doing here with DEI work, and it's also the underpinning of what we're doing with organizational effectiveness. I was keeping a tick mark back in the back of the room about how many times I heard the word culture or DEIA mentioned today. It was mentioned quite a bit. And so when you kind of think about some of those things, and packaging these things into a culture strategy, that's how we move past, looking at this work simply as remedy work, but more so as that structural diversity work really to move us in a direction to get to the impact we want to achieve. It's also about using data, both quantitative and qualitative data, to make sure that these conversations are evidence-based and not just opinion-based. And it's also about how do we make this data actionable. And I'm going to get into this, on subsequent slides. But we've developed two models to kind of help us get to this. And I know Marvy's going to get really excited about this because she and I have talked about this pretty extensively. But one of those models is a maturity model. And that maturity model is basically, it's a 5-phase continuum that uses both quantitative and qualitative data and about 30 pieces of assessment criteria to really assess the efficacy of DEI capabilities within the organization. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more detailed as we progress through the slides here. Then we've also developed an underrepresentation tool. And this is one of the efforts that I'm probably the most proud of because we've basically taken every job series within the federal government and linked them to analogs provided by the American Community Survey, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the Department of Labor. And now we can tell you the level of diversity that can be achieved if that segment of society were available at the national level, at the state level, and all the way down to the niche occupational specialty level. We've also incorporated a predictive analytic because we've baked in historical workforce information and projected census and projected BLS information. Now we can tell you when we can reach population parity for each one of those job series as well. So it's a really powerful framework. And then to kind of get around some of the legal scrutiny, and Ponch, I probably asked for forgiveness for doing it, but I took that model over to the DC courts and I briefed it to the chief justices because I wanted to get their reaction to whether or not that tool would be perceived as affirmative action or quotas, and when I kind of walked them through, how we've looked at researching, 30, 40 years of case law and having good conversations with Angel, who's in the back of the room, who keeps me honest from a legal perspective. And that model was very well received. We were able to kind of message it, to demonstrate how it was in the spirit of the SCOTUS decision on affirmative action. And so just thinking about how you can kind of navigate the legal challenges and the scrutiny, that becomes even more important, particularly as we want to diversify our STEM talent. And before I move to the next slide, I would also kind of say, I had an opportunity to brief the Bay Area conference last year, thanks to Vic. Vic signs me up for a lot of stuff, and I never can say no to Vic. And one of the things and one of the things I said to that group was, everybody in that room kind of represents civic symbols of democracy, and as civic symbols of democracy, we can all show love and pride for this country while we reconcile for past indiscretions and vice versa, and so as I kind of think about that in the vein of polarity thinking, that's where we're taking most of the things that you're hearing me talk about today. And I won't get into this again, but this is the underrepresentation model you just kind of heard me talking about, and I have a data visual on the next slide that kind of demonstrates how we're initially pulling all this data together, and maybe at an appropriate time I can actually demonstrate the tool to you so you can kind of see, how the confidence factors and how all of those things come into play. And I also want to thank Ms. Amilda Rivers and her team from NCSCS in the back of the room too, because they are helping to ensure that we put in the level of rigor and discipline, as we build these tools out. So just superb collaboration across the agency as we kind of build this out. But in thinking about some of the congressional scrutiny, we also have to generate on an annual basis something called a Management Directive 715 report. And that's basically a report that depicts participation rates by grade levels and occupational specialties. And so what we've done with this tool is we kind of built that tool so that it kind of serves as a bolt-on capability to the MD 715 report. And so linking that model to a congressionally mandated report, that just kind of helps you to really, get around the scrutiny. In a recent conversation I had with Secretary Del Toro over at the Navy, one of the things I kind of mentioned to him was, he said, well, Chuck, if you had to give me an elevator speech about the tool, what would it be? And I said, well, the tool basically helps you to harmonize diversity and meritocracy without compromising one for the other. You know, this cannot be an instance anymore where it has to be one or the other. This is another example of polarity thinking where it can be both and. You know, so harmonizing diversity and meritocracy without compromising one for the other. And you know, in this tool, it walks you through a series of steps where it kind of enhances barrier analysis. So you know, when you run the information, and let's just say if you're underrepresented in females for a particular engineering capability, well, the model is going to ask you to go and look at your historical hiring trends. Did you have a chance to leverage any hiring flexibilities or any targeted hiring events? It's also going to tell you to go and compare your position descriptions or your job criteria with what we see in the federal government to what you see in the private sector. Do you have an opportunity to modernize your position descriptions? And when you look at it from that approach, this tool kind of helps the agency stay competitive with the private sector because it's modernizing the workforce. From an organizational culture and climate perspective, it's also going to tell you to go and take a look to see if this particular occupational specialty, has it been subjected to a high number of sexual harassment complaints or other types of complaint systems. And so it really does a good job of really taking barrier analysis to the next level. And so, and hopefully you all can see this chart okay, but this chart kind of represents what our initial data visuals look like. They've kind of progressed a little bit since we developed this, but as you take a look at this, this represents the Black and African Americans here at the National Science Foundation in all of our STEM specialties. Now, we can absolutely disaggregate the data, but just for the sake of conversation today, we aggregated information just so you can just kind of see how the information kind of falls out. The blue bar represents what the benchmark would look like once you integrate all the data within the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Labor. And right now you see it as a static benchmark. It's showing you 3.7%. Well, we've kind of advanced this a little bit, so now that projected benchmark is dynamic now, so it kind of changes over time based on how we have the data put together. But as you look at this, as you look out through 2030, based off of historical hiring trends and the information pulled together, you can see that gap is going to increase over time if we don't do something about it. So here's where our partnership with NCSES has become just so invaluable because they've given us a research methodology to kind of help us refine this a bit. And so we've looked at 4 levers that we can pull that will change the trajectory of when we'll reach population parity. And so if you look at a position description update, or if you look at a targeting hiring event or a policy update, how does it change the trajectory over time? Now, we don't want to just keep putting this data together and just put it on a slide and admiring the data. We need to make it actionable and putting some controls into the fabric of the organization to really get to the point where we can start to make some change over time. We all know that diversity is a deliberate outcome that won't happen overnight, but I'm confident that with some of these controls that we're putting in place, with the focus on organizational change, it'll absolutely make a difference. I should probably also note that, you know, Bev gave us, and also Dr. Cook from APLU, Bev gave me an opportunity to pitch some of these models in front of the ASEE, you know, back in the fall, and you know, this information was very well received, and I think we're going to adopt some of these methodologies to look at how we do some assessment in our engineering community. So real excited about that. I say that because, you know, these models are not just applicable in the government sector; it can be used in the academic sector as well, and in the private sector as well. And so, with our partnerships, we absolutely hope to expand some of this work. The next model that I want to talk to you about is a maturity model. And so this maturity model is designed to really help organizations better operationalize inclusion. And I don't want to use inclusion and belonging interchangeably. You know, inclusion is that signature behavior that we want to see. Belonging is the outcome that we want to get to. You know, and so this model is intended to really kind of help organizations get to that shift to move through the continuum. And the model has 5 phases. It has a compliance, which is that basic DEIA understanding, and then it moves you up through evolving, acceptance, cohesive, and inclusive. You know, and so once an organization runs through the mechanics of the model is going to generate an assessment report, and it's going to show how they rate in the policy area, how they rate in the talent management area, how they rate in the operational capabilities area, and how they rate in culture. And then the model is going to aggregate all that information. And it's going to show you where you fall on a continuum, which I'll show you on the next graphic of what the continuum looks like. But the model doesn't just stop there. It also generates a get well plan to help move organizations from compliance to fully inclusive. Now, I had an opportunity to deploy this model with the Department of the Navy. And when we first did it, I think we launched it across 20 naval commands. And on average, they all fell right in the middle in the acceptance range when we first launched it. Well, each one of those organizations, they took the get well plan that the model generates, and then we went back and did a subsequent assessment. It was between 6 to 9 months later, and each one of those organizations had moved to the right. And the department average moved from acceptance to cohesive within a 9-month span. And so I was real proud of that. I kind of look at this model also like a reversible T-shirt, because while I can assess at the organizational level, we can also assess at the individual leader level as well. We developed a tool called the Leadership Reflection Tool, and kudos to Janice, who's sitting in the room, because her organization was the first organization to pilot the Leadership Reflection Tool. And Janice, I'll report to you today that we've now moved from it being an automated PDF to it's now fully automated in Qualtrics. And so it's my hope that once we continue to integrate these models with our partners over in HRM, that maybe this may be a tool that we can bake in to be a part of executive development programs and a part of training curriculum to kind of really help to really build and bolster inclusive leadership across the foundation. There's probably another area that I want to really kind of touch on that you don't hear a lot of CEOs talk much about, but Rhonda and I have a conversation about this pretty regularly, and that's the way that this leadership reflection tool is established. It does a really good job of operationalized restorative practice, because there's a very strong self-awareness and self-reflection component with this tool, which are centered to really being able to demonstrate what a restorative practice looks like. And before I move off of this slide, you see a little bullet on here that talks about SOGI initiatives, sexual orientation and gender identity initiatives. We talk a lot about having gaps with how we're able to capture SOGI data to really look at barriers for the LGBTQ community. Well, part of it is because we haven't done our jobs with really making the environment comfortable enough for members of that community to want to report sexual orientation or gender identity. And so one of the goals of this model is to really do a better job to help really refine the environment to make our community more comfortable, so they are comfortable with reporting. And we're in partnership with OPM, because OPM is looking at NSF to really help them define some policy recommendations to how the entire government can capture SOGI data over time. And so we're really excited about this initiative. So here's what the continuum looks like. You kind of heard me talk about the 5 phases. And again, once an organization goes through the mechanics, they'll get a report that shows exactly where they fall on this continuum. And there's definitions, here for each one of these phases. And I'm happy to provide additional information, because I know it's hard to read on a slide. But this just kind of gives you a sense of what I mean when I say moving an organization from the left to further in the right on the continuum. All right. You heard me mention earlier about culture being the underpinning to all we do, whether it's linking this work, DEI work, to culture, or whether it's trying to improve organizational effectiveness. And so here at NSF, we recently just launched a culture assessment here at NSF, and we had an opportunity to gain insights into what we can do to review our mission statement and some of our strategic planning to ensure that we have complete alignment as we move forward. We got some insight into how we can improve consistency, so we got some opportunities to really incorporate some process governance to increase transparency and even build trust here across the agency. Involvement, that's very closely linked to inclusion. And I won't dig into that a bit more, but we have opportunities to improve there as well. And then adaptability, how are we really responding to emerging requirements or changing in the environment, and so we're going to have an opportunity to brief these results to our workforce early next week. But I'm really proud of our leader, our ELT leadership that's sitting in the back of the room, because, in order for us to get better, we have to get real about the challenges that we face in order to get to that point to where we're getting better. And so this is a good first step in what we're doing here at NSF to really improve organizational effectiveness and ensure that we give our workforce the right resources to be successful in what they do on a day-to-day basis. All right. Yes, ma'am.
So thank you so much. It was really a great presentation, and I love the approach. Being a geek and having mathematical model.
I got one more slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll be quick though, and I'll come right to you. I did want to also kind of highlight how we're having these conversations with other federal agencies. And so on a monthly basis, I have conversations with NIST, NASA, DOD, NIH, and we talk about the same things that I've kind of put in place and what I've kind of briefed to you today, you know, these are also things that we're considering to see how we can broaden across, you know, our partners within the federal government as well. And so, Ponch, we talk a lot about, creating opportunities everywhere, and so when I'm talking to this group, I always say, hey, well, we want to create opportunities everywhere for everybody. I just kind of broaden that statement a little bit, and so to continue to have those conversations with my partners and my other CDIO colleagues, that's real important. And now we're to the point now where we're also having conversations with OSTP so we can consider how we can formalize some of the informal conversations that we've been having. And so I've talked enough this afternoon. You're probably tired of hearing the country twang. So I will pause, and ma'am, I'll come back to you. I know you had a question.
Yes, thank you. No, we are not ever tired of listening about this great stuff. I was just wondering if you can comment on this. So you discussed this 5-step model, right? Mm-hmm. How do we know when the organization transition between those steps? And when do you think, or maybe for sure, where NSF is now in the scale of 1 to 5? And plus, I also appreciate a lot your explanation of certain terms, because I noticed that in some academic circles now people don't use word inclusion because belonging is preferred. But you made it very clear that a mindset of inclusion transitions to the mindset, a culture of belonging, right? So great. Thank you so much for explanation.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm a stickler for differentiating a measure of performance from a measure of effectiveness. And so you'll hear me talk a lot about being outcome-based thinking. And so differentiating inclusion for belonging, really, it falls into that vein. Now back to your question about, understanding when the organizations transition, it's going to be different for other organizations. When I launched this, at the Department of the Navy, some organizations were eager to be reassessed within 6 months. Some wanted to wait 9 months. Some wanted to wait 12 months. It's important, when we walk organizations through the mechanics of that model, I don't want them to think that this is an I gotcha test or another compliance drill. This is Chuck Barber and his team walking shoulder to shoulder with you to help you get better, and so just depending on the leadership's priorities, and I don't ever want to be disruptive when we're doing this kind of work, but I let them decide when they want me to come back in and make that assessment. But the model does a really good job of showing how you've made progress, between assessment cycles. So the criteria we just wrote a 50-page technical manual that walks you through the mechanics, the criteria, the approach to how we do it, and so it's a very rigorous approach, with how we make those assessments. And I can't say where NSF is right now because we haven't launched this, at NSF. We have a number of initiatives in play right now. We launched the culture assessment. We launched the FES survey results. We got some pulse results, and we don't want to survey fatigue the organization, or get to that point. But I do want to get to a point to where, with Ponch and Karen's approval, I want to get to the point to where we do like a top level maturity model assessment to kind of really see, where we fall as an agency. And so maybe once we get that done, I'll be happy to report back to you so you can see where we fall.
So Chuck,
Yes,
thanks
sir.
again. Great presentation. You mentioned just now sort of performance versus effectiveness or something like that, essentially inputs versus outputs. And so I'm curious, on campuses, for example, our campus, we do a climate survey. Mm-hmm. And, we try to do it and look at the results longitudinally and see at least directionally whether we're going in the right direction or not, et cetera. There are sort of confounding factors in those things, though. So, for example, if we make it, as we have recently, much, much easier to report bias or report sexual harassment and such earlier, you get an uptick of reports. So I guess all that to say, I'm curious how accurately you think one can assess the impact of the things you're doing, especially because there's so much granularity to it. There's so many elements of it. How do we know those things are working, I guess?
Yeah, I think regardless of what we do, we're going to have some conjecture. I won't just sit here and not say that we probably won't, but I think we have to continuously assess not just organizational climate, but also organizational culture. One is going to show the perceptions of how an employee feels about the organization, and one is going to talk more about the experience. And I think through continuous assessment through those, I think you're going to see some trends. And I'll just in thinking about our FEVS results and our culture results that we did here, while the measurement approach was different for both instruments, you definitely see some trends, in both instruments that we can work on. And so it's just a matter of continuously being able to look at both of those areas and just really identifying those trends, that driver analysis, that's really going to drive some of those changes within your organization.
Just for people, FEVS is Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey.
I'm sorry about the acronym.
So is there such a thing as sort of survey fatigue? I mean, how often can you actually survey people?
Yeah, I think there is survey fatigue, but I think what we have to be able to do is really show how we're making outputs of those surveys actionable. So we can't just have the workforce take the survey and then not be able to talk actions, about what we're taking. And so, one of the things that Karen is pushing me to do is, develop a reporting mechanism. So once we develop that agency level action plan, to be able to report back to the workforce on a continuous basis, hey, we heard you. Here's what we're doing about it. And so just being able to kind of, and I'll give you an example. I first launched this same culture model at the Defense Logistics Agency back in 2013. And the first year I did it, the response rate was about 40%. And I did it on an 18-month cycle, and then really showing the outputs of those action plans. By the time I left DLA in 2018, the response rate went up to 75%. And so I think showing the actionable piece, I think that's important. Yes, ma'am.
I'm
sorry.
Just a general reminder, please raise your virtual hand because people are jumping ahead of other folks who've been waiting patiently. So Maureen, and then Wanda, and then Deborah.
So thank you for your report, and I love your graphics. I'm curious, given the rise over the last several years in anti-Semitic, anti-Islamic, and anti-Christian harassment, bigotry, and bias, and even violence, a very large percentage of Americans, maybe 70%, identify with one of those three groups. What, if anything, is NSF doing kind of analogous to SOGI initiatives? Maybe there should be a ROFI, religious association and faith identity or something initiative to try to address the concerns of people who in many cases really do feel very frightened in some environments because of their religious affiliation.
Yeah, and I'll also tell you, you're touching on a really key point as to why, eventually we'll have to move away from the acronyms and start to look at this more so as culture writ large. That for that very exact reason, because we're going to run the risk of excluding a group or leaving a group out if we don't do that eventually. We had some recent conversations with OPM about that, to be honest with you, because I think a lot of organizations across the government are struggling with how to address the topic that you just raised. And so it's my hope that as we continue those conversations, we'll put some concrete things in place that we can actually address it in the midst of the scrutiny that's in the middle of it as well. So hopefully I'll have a better answer for you next time we can talk.
Briefly, thanks very much, Chuck, for this very forward-looking, evidence-based approach to the DEIA issue. It's quite informative. I was really struck by your characterization of this being a gateway to psychological safety. I think that captures things very, very nicely, and those from diverse backgrounds can inherently resonate to that. I also liked your characterization of using data quantitatively, quantifiably, qualitatively, and actionably.
Yes,
The
ma'am.
actionable part is especially important. I have one simple question. You passingly mentioned that a demo exists. Is it possible to have access to that demo so that one could see it in action? I don't know if you have a link or anything like that.
Well, Wanda knows I'm not going to say no to her either. So Wanda, we'll get you a demo, I promise you. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
First, when you do these surveys, do you disaggregate by identity? Because at the university level, when we do that, we see very different results in terms of how the climate and culture is interpreted, depending on someone's identity. And
I missed the question. You said disaggregate by?
By identity, by race.
We disaggregate by race, division, office head. There's a lot of disaggregation
So
levels.
do you see differences? We often see major differences by group.
We do, but again, we're still in the early stages of really dissecting the analysis, of those results. But we absolutely do see some trends in all the different disaggregation approaches that we've taken. Yes,
So
ma'am.
that probably will be important in order to not mute the effects on for different groups or different people or different offices, like you said. The second question I have is that it seems like what I thought was going to present us, well, let me put it this way. There are different kinds of arguments that can be made for diversity. We've been talking more about inclusion and culture here. But when I think about the teacher workforce, for example, which is something I spend a lot of time looking at and why it's important to have a more diverse teacher workforce, there are both extremely strong arguments for that are subtle and important, and there's some that are sort of just taken for granted. And I'm just curious what the argument is that's being made across this for why it's important to be diversifying both, in all these sectors, what the argument for diversity is, because I couldn't quite figure that out, whether it was just assumed that it was better, but if so, what's the reasoning being pushed for this? And if that's not clear, I can explain.
No, it's very clear
Okay.
because the business case comes up in every conversation that I have. And I'll be honest with you, that's also one of the reasons why I put the organizational effectiveness model in place, because once I continue to pull the levers on the underrepresentation model and some of the other things that's going to help to diversify the workforce here, then we're going to see changes in the organizational effectiveness model as well. Yeah, we can talk until we're blue in the face about how diversity improves business, how it improves readiness. But I'll also want to make sure that we keep that humanity piece at the front of it too. But I don't have the data for you right now. But I think over time we will have it. But I think there is a business case to be made how diversity does improve organizational effectiveness.
Dr. Barber, thank you very much. So I have a question with reference to, we started off with love for each other and let's move forward. I really liked it. Thank you for doing that, telling that. So then, and along that way, you said that through collaboration and dialogue, we can develop a culture. So what is the best practice or tactical way to do it in an organization? So can you kind of share some of the best practices? Because with all this social media going on, how do we get this dialogue going? So
in terms of increasing
the awareness of where we are, how to improve together, and all those things.
Yeah, I keep going back to, again, about how you future-proof this work, and so linking the work more so to culture. To me, that kind of helps to remove any perception of this work being divisive or any perception of the work being solely focused on activism. And I will tell you, when I've had conversations with folks on the Hill, whether it's on the left or on the right, and linking the conversation more so to culture, it's always so much well received. I don't think I can stress enough that culture truly is the underpinning, to all we do here. And I'll always talk about the models, that they don't have anything to do with quotas or affirmative action. This is about how you help the organization remain competitive for the sake of national security, for the sake of advancing science, and so just keeping the conversation, again, data to make it evidence-based, that always helps. And I hope that answered your question.
It's more informal collaboration within an organization, like every day. How do we increase that amount of dialogue and collaboration?
Well, I'll tell you, with everything that you saw here, it can't be the office of the CDIO doing it alone. I mean, it's going to take OGC, it's going to take OECR, it's going to take our HR shop, it's going to take NCSES, and so, having that North Star with harmonizing diversity and meritocracy, that keeps us all rowing together. That kind of helps us unify, with the work that conversations with Irwin, with James Moore, it's all of us doing it, and so, having that North Star thinking, that outcome-based thinking, that's what keeps it all unified.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Marvi, and then Dorada, and then Marlon.
So first of all, thank you for appealing to my nerdy side. and actually building, a database model to go about the problem, right, in a way that we can use data to make decisions. Second, my second question, or maybe challenge point for you, was going to be, start with a why, which you did. And then my third point was going to be like, what are you doing to actually collaborate with other agencies, which you mentioned too. And I actually don't have any other questions. Because I really wanted to point this out. This is actually an important moment for me anyway, because I can see how you are taking and learning from the different meetings that we have had, and how you're taking the inputs from the board and building something that is powerful, informative, and that people can use to actually make decisions. So, congratulations on your work, and I think it's pretty cool and excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, Marvy, you hit on something important, and I don't want to give you ammunition for a question for sure. But we're also, with this work, we're also collaborating with the academic community as well, because the University of Arkansas, with me being from Arkansas, and Dan has the same ties that I have. Yeah, but they asked me to author an open textbook, that's going to be used across the country. So these concepts that you heard me talk about, these things are going to be published in an open textbook that not just federal agencies, but other academic institutions can use as well.
Yeah, you even at the end of some of your comments, you actually mentioned culture too, which is also something that if for data-oriented people, we forget that it's actually all about culture. So all points taken and all points marked.
All right.
Good job.
Oh, it was just a comment for Deborah, but she left. I thought she was asking for some documented proof, scientific proof of value of diversity. I mean, there's a series of McKinsey reports, and there are numbers there which are very, very telling. But I'll send her an email.
You allude earlier a couple of times that you saw some common trends in the assessment. I'm curious, can you give an example of one, or maybe some factors associated with those? And the only reason why I'm asking that, because I feel like if we can address that, it'll be helpful for the different agencies that have that common trend.
Yeah, one key trend, and this is particularly with how we have to respond to, external pressures and things of that nature, is perceptions of a misalignment in our mission statement. Are we moving away from basic research? Are we moving more towards innovation? Well, the answer to all that should be yes. We need all of that. And so this just kind of gives us an opportunity to collaborate, as a leadership team and as an agency, to really look at our mission statement and look at how we're developing our strategic plan to make sure that we remain in alignment. To me, that's good constructive tension that gives us an opportunity to really improve, how we can move forward. And in some cases, as a leadership team, we have to make decisions, that may not necessarily, we might necessarily, for the folks below us, may not necessarily have all the factors, all the decision points, with some of the decisions that we make, and in some cases that kind of gives a perception of a gap in leadership trust and things of that nature. And so we have some opportunities, to kind of address how we want to improve leadership and trust, moving forward as well. And so those are just two key areas. Key areas.
So Vic and I are going to take the prerogative of chair and vice chair. I'm going to let him go first, and then I have a.
I just want to commend you on your presentation, but I also want to share with everybody at the Bayer conference last week. He was on the stage with a representative who has as much money as James Moore, if not more, from the Undersecretary of Defense, from the president of the American Chemical Society, and a VP from Abbott Labs, because they're all wrestling with this, despite what we hear in the news and things like that. Your presentation was so compelling, as you know. So once you have those seminars, I felt bad for the other people because everybody was lined up to ask him questions. And at this conference, large number of CEOs and VPs, because the whole big thing is about workforce. And to your point is, yes, there's all this demand in these areas, in the STEM areas, but the issue of culture and how we quantify that, and how do we quantify how are we making the culture better to have retention, and those things are extremely important. So I commend you on what you've done.
Thank you, Vic.
I was going to say a version of the same thing, Chuck. Thanks for all you're doing. And maybe a question. You know, obviously Chips and Science created this new role, not that the foundation wasn't actively involved in these areas before, but as you sort of look at the mandate that Chips and Science laid out, what can we most do to help you? And what do you see as the sort of biggest challenges going forward?
Well, for me, the biggest challenge is going to be the legal and political scrutiny. You know, that is the one thing, Dan, that keeps me up at night. You know, I even when I'm here at work, I keep the TV on CNN because I want to see what's flashing across the ticker about what state is going to pop up a new law, what law is going to be, you know, what bill is going to be enacted into law. You know, and so I think being able to be involved in discussions like this, you know, with this so much genius in this room, just the support that you give. That's the biggest thing that you can do right now. Just continue dialogue. And I would say, you know, in terms of Chips and Science, you know, I think as my role continues to evolve, you know, I think you're going to really start to see my role have a different balance with what I'm doing internally and, you know, what we're doing externally. My colleagues, Punch, Karen, they give me a lot of autonomy to, you know, to really do some of the things, you know, from an external perspective, you know, but I think as this role continues to evolve, because it's still fairly new, I've only been here for about 13 months now. But as the role continues to evolve, I think you're going to really see some other good things come down the pipe.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. Thanks for the discussion.